Hey folks, I haven't made a video in a while. I figured it's about time I made one. I post a lot of other people's videos on my page, and people probably wonder, how come you don't post none of yours? Well, one reason is I got so many of them that if I stuck them all on there, my page would be full of me. And to be honest with you, I don't want to look at myself every time I click on my page. There's a link to them if somebody wants to look at them, and otherwise you can look at the other guys that I put on there that are a lot better at it than I am. But one thing I'm pretty good at is painting pictures. Well, how I made my living for most of my life. But anyway, I'm doing this one for a buddy of mine who wrote a book. Coach Chief, a lot of you know him. He's pretty well known in the biker community. He wrote a book talking about his life story. And it's pretty interesting. If y'all haven't read a good book lately, I encourage you to get a copy of Outlaw Chapel. I want to read a little bit to you just to give you a little glimpse into what this book's about. He grew up in the hills and dirt poor, and I'm going to start here in chapter 6, give you an idea of how he got into this whole biker deal. I saw my first motorcycle and rider in 1965. I was only 10 years old, but I knew that day that I wanted to be a biker. Other kids bought comic books as youngsters, and I saved my pennies to buy motorcycle magazines. I fell in love with the lifestyle and set my mind to one day riding across America on a big Harley Davidson and to be part of a club. Joel 2:3-5 says, "A fire devoureth before them, and behind them a flame burneth. The land is the Garden of Eden before them, and behind them a desolate wilderness. Yea, and nothing shall escape them. The appearance of them is as the appearance of horses and his horsemen. So shall they run. Like the noise of chariots on the tops of mountains shall they leap. Like the noise of a flame of fire that devoureth the stubble, as a strong people set in battle array." Now that's from the Bible. That's a little quote Coach East threw in there. I guess that's how he thought of bikers as a boy. It was 1965, and I was lying on the side of the highway on an embankment in their front yard playing Army. As cars went speeding by, I pretended to shoot imaginary enemies from them. They were passing within approximately 10 feet from where I lay in a prone position. I was playing like I was Sarge from the TV show Combat, starring Vic Morrow, a weekly program that little boys like me loved watching. I watched that show when I was a kid too. I thought it was pretty cool. So as I was playing my game, watching the semis and cars go by, I heard a different noise coming my way. A noise that I had never heard before, and it was getting closer to me. After what seemed like hours, when in reality it may have been seconds, here this loud, roaring beast came. It was a motorcycle, but it looked and sounded like the bikes I had previously seen. It looked and sounded nothing like the bikes that I had previously seen. It was a Harley Davidson, and the man who sat upon it was the coolest person I had ever laid eyes on. There was a TV show about a nomadic dude riding all across America on a Harley Sportster called Ben Kane Bronson. The show may have been on at this time, but we only got one channel and I never seen it. But man, oh man, this wasn't a TV actor, this was real. This scene would become another watershed moment in my young life. I was seeing something new here and something super special. We had a family who lived beside us in Gillyville by the name of Knott. They were good people, and one of them, Wally, became one of my best friends during my teenage years as he took me everywhere with him. Sometimes we would go to bars in other cities and drink beer. I was probably 16. Play the jukebox and shuffleboard. Without Killer, I would not have gotten into too many places other than home. I never did understand why he liked me so much, but he did, and I cared very much about him. I think it was the fact he was just so laid back and didn't care, like many of the people who influenced me. Oh yeah, he wasn't scared of anyone either, being only about 5'10" and weighing maybe 140 pounds, but he never backed down. I saw him get whipped a couple of times, but anyway, the Knotts also had a junkyard in their backyard, just a bunch of old cars that were disabled some way. They would sell parts of those old cars to local people to keep their jalopies running. Wally would actually cut the cars in two using an axe, the instrument a person would use to cut trees down with to sell as junk metal at the scrap yard in town. Sometimes their car cemetery caused problems in the neighborhood, and the state hated it. But overall, it was the way Mr. Knott could keep his family of 13 children fed. He was disabled from black lung, a condition from inhaling coal dust while working underground in the coal mines, which was a place where many of the men in this community worked. This is a terrible disease that seriously impairs people who have it. They just can't breathe without a struggle. It becomes almost impossible task to take air into their lungs, and even more of a task just to live as the coal particles literally rip the lungs with every breath. Many men have passed away from it, and I've watched them as fear would enter their eyes as they were gasping for air, but there was no room in the lungs to receive it. My Uncle Gene died from this, and it was a heart-wrenching, cruel death. Now back to the motorcycle story. The bike was a brand new blue and white 1964 Harley Davidson Electric Glide, and it was beautiful. The solid white bags that hung on the side accentuated the bright royal blue gas tank, with the underside of the 5-gallon fat bob tank being white. It had a long chrome horn on it and a windshield that was trimmed in blue with transparent blue bottom to it. It was mesmerizing. The rider wore a white t-shirt with a pack of smokes rolled up in the left sleeve. He wore a hat that looked like a bus driver's hat, but it was black with a white brim. His Levi's were also rolled up, and you could see the shiny buckle that held the strap in place on his black engineer boots. I mean, if he was here and dressed like that today, you would have sworn he stepped right out of the 1950s rebel motorcycle world. This guy was so cool. His name was Gary Wayne Hare, also known as Hare Boy. I would get to know him much better in about 15 years after the purchase of my first Harley Davidson. I walked up to that rider and just stared at him and his motorcycle. He was talking to James Knott, the older brother of Wally, about some car parts. But in mid-sentence, he turned toward me and nodded. He had acknowledged me, folks. I was smitten by the biker bug, the Harley mystique, and what is called the nomadic lifestyle. Though I never got to do the nomad thing, I knew from that moment on I was going to be a biker. a biker that rode a Harley. I bought my first bike when I was 14. I purchased my first Harley in 1979. It was a 73 Sportster, and even though it was beautiful, I knew I had made a mistake immediately. Why is it that back then many people started out on Sportster? Maybe because they were plentiful. I'm not sure, but I soon found out it was trouble, always breaking down. Yeah, I have one of them, and they do. I guess the new ones are pretty good, but the old ones were a pain in the butt. That's how I met Gary Wayne again. I was riding through the small river town where he lived when the shifter, which was on the wrong side, slipped out of the shifting fork. This was internal. And I was stranded about 6 miles from the house, and it was getting dark. But I decided to start pushing this heavy slug home. I was 6 miles from the house with one very long hill between myself and my garage. And out of nowhere, Hair Boy steps out of the garage and says, "What's wrong with her?" To which I replied, it won't shift. After explaining to him, he said, "Push it in my shop and I'll give you a ride home," which he did. And on that ride, he said to come by tomorrow and he would help me fix the Sporty. The next day I went back to his place. When I got there, he handed me a manual on my particular bike and told me where to start. About 3 hours later, I was going again. He didn't do the work for me as he wanted me to learn how. I learned later Gary was a great mechanic on any vehicle, and he specialized in Volkswagens and later on Ford Pintos. He became a great friend to me. We never got to ride together as he sold his bagger because of a serious injury to his back, from which took about 10 years from his wife. Excuse me. Not only did Hair Boy tell me about Harleys, he was also the first person to share Jesus with me outside of a church building. Of course, I blew him off, but he planted a seed in my heart. Some people said he was crazy. Others said he was the best. For me, he was just a good friend that shared the love of Harley Davidson and Jesus. I got saved about 5 years before he died, and not sure if he ever got to hear me preach, but if not, I'm not for certain. I'm for certain he was proud of all that God had blessed me with. Well, this book goes on, talks about Cochise ending up in an outlaw motorcycle club and spending years running with the devil. Then towards the back of it, things change. He gets turned around. And ended up being a preacher. He's probably one of the most well-known biker preachers there is. He's the only one I ever heard of that preaches in the Boot Hill Saloon once a month. That's pretty awesome. But anyway, that's a little preview of what the book's about. My daughter just pulled up, making all this racket in my truck. Well, I'm going to get out of here and anyway, get you a copy of this book. It's pretty good. You bikers will dig it. Here, I'll give you a little better look at my sign I painted. Yeah, Coach he's got a church over in Daytona Beach, and I don't know, he's got half a dozen things going on over there. One of them is a thrift store, and I painted this to he can put in the window of his thrift store and, you know, attract people, let them know that the book is there for sale. And there is the book. And it's even got pictures. Well, that's all for now. And I'll catch you later.